I'm Dr. Fiona Lovely, and this is the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. I'm taking the taboos of menopause and perimenopause and bringing light to the dark. No bullshit, no shame. It's time for us to gain a new paradigm in female health, out with the old and in with the new, and I'm bringing fresh perspectives from someone in the arena. I've been practicing women's health for nearly 20 years, and I'm spilling the tea on what it means to live at midlife, knowing that the best is yet to come. I'm sharing my Gen X approach to living through this transition. Sassy, a bit sweary, and always honest. Tactical tips and instantly usable information is my aim. I hope to make you laugh and that you learn something new that helps you embrace the change. Together, we bring power to the peri. Onward to the podcast. Hello, listeners. This is Dr. Fiona Lovely and the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. And I'm doing a little introduction to my new friend, Tammy O'Rourke, nurse practitioner, doctorate in nursing. So Dr. Tammy O'Rourke. Don't you love that? I love women that have all of the qualifications. Anyways, Tammy and I met recently on the internet, and what I didn't know when I asked her to come on the show was that she and I were going to have a really interesting conversation about sort of the state of healthcare for women, for sure, and menopause, because that's what I talk about. I love that conversation. But also the role that nurse practitioners play for us, especially if we have the availability of a nurse practitioner and or in the absence of having a doctor that understands hormones that can help with the menopause transition. So let me take a moment to introduce Tammy, and I'll share a little bit as well what she and I talked about. Dr. Tammy O'Rourke is a nurse practitioner with her PhD in nursing. She spent the first 20 years of her nurse practitioner career in primary care. However, in 2019, she moved into regenerative medicine, and in early 2021, she completed her first hormone certification course in the United States through WorldLink Medical. Since that time, she's been helping many Canadian men and women rebalance their hormones so that they can find joy in their lives again. Tammy continues to update her hormone knowledge, and she is currently pursuing certification with the North American Menopause Society. You might hear me refer to that as NAMS on this show, North American Menopause Society. She holds active nurse practitioner registration in 4 provinces and speaks nationally and internationally on the topic of healthy aging. She's written her first book, Tammy Talks Hormones, which will be released in the fall of 2024. She has spoken nationally and internationally on the topic of healthy aging. happyhormonescanada.ca, and you can find her on Instagram at Tammy Talks Hormones. Again, I never really know, even with the people that I know outside of the show, what is going to transpire when the two of us come together and have a discussion on the show. And I have to say, this conversation was a surprise to me in the best possible way. First of all, Tammy and we get controversial on what is happening with women's healthcare in Canada for sure, which of course the US is never far behind. But also, we really talk about, is there a reason that women are being kept not at our best? Ooh, there's some good moments in that. So Tammy shares her story of how she went from being a primary care nurse practitioner in the United States to doing this sort of hormone work in regenerative medicine full time. And she said, it's really interesting, but the US is far more advanced when it comes to nurse practitioners. So if you're hearing me, if you're listening to this and you live in the United States, seek out the help of a nurse practitioner. They are so well informed. If you listen to the show on the regular, my own healthcare provider that's taking care of my hormonal health is a nurse practitioner. So I'm fully on board with that. Tammy started one of the first nurse practitioner clinics in Ontario, and not without controversy there, which was so interesting. Again, whenever you get politics involved, whenever you challenge profit or policy, people get pissed. Anyways, Tammy tells her own story of how perimenopause came along in the middle of all of her practice she experienced depression, insomnia, fibroids, endometriosis, and PCOS, and all of these things went undiagnosed. And she happened to come across a book in a bookstore, and I thought this was a great part of the conversation. So tune in to listen to which book she came across. And that caused her to switch over to helping men and women with hormonal health. One of my favorite parts of this conversation was when she and I talked about menopause in the workplace and how the menopause symptoms can rob a woman of her confidence that would have her normally be taking some pretty extraordinary jobs and, the glass ceiling type titles that we should be taking at this age, but many of us just don't feel well enough to do that. I asked Tammy what she would say to the general practitioners who don't know where to start on helping their patients in menopause. And, not everyone is going to have a personalized medicine practice like she does, but at least you can support your patients, etc. And I think it's a good conversation that we need to have. By the way, there is research that we talked about in the show that demonstrates that about 6% of frontline physicians in the United States, this is research that was done, approximately 6% of them feel prepared to talk to women about menopause. And that is a terrifying statistic. So stick with me. I'm going to give you the information you need to help yourself, to advocate for yourself when you're talking to your healthcare provider. And also, I'm going to give you tidbits about how to do this right and healthy aging along the way. Because our generation, we have a desire to avoid chronic illness. We saw what happened to our mothers, our grandmothers, our fathers, even our grandfathers, and other members of our family, that we're living in a generation where, in a lot of ways, we were discarded after no longer being of reproductive age. So anyways, Tammy and I had a great conversation. I loved this conversation. I know I always say that to you, but it's true. Basically, I just get these really amazing women I get to talk to on the show. Men too, although far more rarely. But I just think it's so cool that you get to be a listener as I have these robust chats with some really, really amazing people. So Tammy was no exception. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. It's important to me that the supplements I use are of the highest quality, and that's why for more than 3 years I've been drinking AG1. It is researched and developed by an in-house team of scientists, doctors, and nutritionists with decades of experience in their respective fields. Quality for AG1 isn't just a buzzword, it's a commitment backed by expert-led scientific research, high-quality ingredients, and rigorous testing. I know I can trust what's in every scoop of AG1 because they obsess over product quality, the standards of manufacturing partners, and sustainable practices. It's easy and fast to use. Drinking AG1 mixed with water in 1 scoop a day covers my nutritional bases. Prebiotics, probiotics, digestive enzymes for gut support, B vitamins and rhodiola for energy support, folate, magnesium, and ashwagandha for stress support, and vitamin C and zinc for my immune health. So if you want to replace your multivitamin and more, start with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D plus K2 and 5 free travel packs with your first subscription at drinkag1.com/Fiona Lovely. That's drinkag1.com/Fiona Lovely. This is the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. I'm Dr. Fiona Lovely, and today I'm joined by Dr. Tammy O'Rourke, nurse practitioner. And I know there's a lot of things in there to unpack. So, Tammy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here today.
I'm thrilled to have you. So first things first, we're both Canadian gals practicing in Canada. What part of Canada are you? Where are you?
I'm actually on Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia.
Lovely.
Oh, it's beautiful.
I love
Fantastic.
the East Coast is wonderful.
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing.
Mhm.
Okay, so how did you get, first of all, I want to know how you started in this sort of primary nursing care role. and you found yourself a nurse practitioner and then a PhD in nursing. And like, can we unpack that a little bit, please? Tell us your story.
It's quite a long story, actually. I started with my diploma in nursing from Sir Sanford Fleming College, and as you may or may not recall, in the 90s there was a lot of closures of hospitals, so I couldn't take a full-time job as a nurse, and I moved to the U.S. quite soon out of school, and took traveling nurse positions in Florida, Texas, Michigan, and then ended up in New York State. It's quite fantastic traveling around the US because you can get a look into what their system is. And then when I got to New York, I said, Do I want to do this forever? And I said, No, I think I want to be a nurse practitioner. So I went and did my graduate degree at the State University of New York. It ended up being a BS/MS degree, which I graduated in 2000. And at that time, I was practicing the same as a family physician, doing rounds in hospitals, delivering babies, prescribing all sorts of medications, and doing all sorts of diagnostics. My practice was quite liberal. I took a position there. And then in 2001, shortly after I graduated, I was in the Doctorate of Nurse Practitioner, Doctor of Nurse Practice program at the same university. And I was 1 year in, and my grandmother became ill. So I decided that I should come back to Canada, thinking two things. One, I could just be a nurse practitioner in Canada the same way I was in New York. Two, that I could just pick up my DNP program in Canada. Those two misconceptions were very hard hit because I basically drove 20 minutes over the border from New York to Niagara Falls, Ontario, and I immediately went back in time 20 years.
Wow, that much.
Yes, that much. So as a nurse practitioner in Canada, I couldn't communicate a diagnosis. I could only refill prescriptions off a list of 40 medications. There was very few diagnostic procedures that I could order. And basically I was in like shell shock. And there are no DNP programs in Canada. There still aren't. There's some DN programs now, but they've just started. And the only option was a PhD in nursing. And there were like, I think 12 programs in the country at that time. So again, smack dab in the face. I was like, oh my goodness, what I thought was the reality in Canada and the health system and in the academia world was not the reality that I was gratefully engaging in the US. So I couldn't get a job as a nurse practitioner. There were no funded positions. You had to put your name on a list to get a position in Canada at that time. Eventually, I did get a position about 45-minute drive from where I was living. So I was driving to Havelock to work in a small clinic there with another nurse practitioner under the approval and power of a physician. And I decided, well, maybe my only role is going to be in academia here. So I decided to get my PhD in nursing through the University of Ottawa. And at the same time that I was doing my PhD, I was actually developing one of the first nurse practitioner led clinics in Ontario. So, very new model, but we have a physician shortage, as they do in most places in the world.
Mhm.
And so I led the development of that, lobbied it, studied it from a stakeholder perspective during my dissertation work. And wow, did I learn a lot about health system change. It's really, really slow. So fast forward, I was in Alberta. I went and took a position after my PhD at the University of Alberta. I now teach for Athabasca University as a professor, but fast forward to perimenopause. I'd
Mm.
always had problems with hormones, always. I mean, you name it. I had undiagnosed stage 4 endometriosis, which they had a hard time figuring out. They put me on Lupron eventually, which put me into instant menopause. Ooh, depression on the floor, like couldn't get out of bed. It was so bad. And then I had fibroids. So I still have 5 fibroids. And I had an endometrioma removed from one of my ovaries prior to my last pregnancy. So I was just a ball of estrogen with very little
Yes.
progesterone, but
Yeah.
nobody ever told me. Nobody
No.
ever told me. Heavy bleeding, pain, missed work, cyst on my ovary. So you can throw PCOS in there too, polycystic ovarian syndrome. Never, ever, ever received a diagnosis for that. And then when I hit perimenopause, probably earlier than 45, but 45, 46, wow, couldn't sleep. I was up in the middle of the night, totally exhausted the next day. I'd be sending emails to my team, be like, what is she doing up at 4 o'clock in the morning? Is she really up doing these emails? And I'd be like, yeah, I'm really up, couldn't get back to sleep. And the roller coaster of emotions, like crying to um, anxiety to depression to deep, dark thoughts of depression, of hurting myself because I didn't think I could go on in this way. Like I had no quality. And I remember being at Fort Langley in BC with my husband who was on business, and I had traveled there with him. And I thought this should be a happy time. You know, my kids are home. I'm on vacation with my husband. We're here. We're going to see the Boston Bruins because that's my husband's favorite team. I'm in Fort Langley. We're in wine country in BC. And I'm like, this should be a happy time for me. But it wasn't. It wasn't a happy time. And I walked into a bookstore in Fort Langley. I still remember it so vividly. And I saw the book Moody Bitches. The drugs you're taking, the sex you're not having, and the sleep you're not, the sleep you're not getting. And that changed my world. That book changed my world. I often speak to my clients about that book. And I started reading, and I'm like, this is me. This is what's happening to me. And at the same time, serendipitously, I had a colleague who was practicing in the BHRT sphere, the HRT sphere. So I went to see her, and she put me on hormones. Well, my life changed dramatically, like game changer, like totally brought me out of the depths that I was in. I could get off the sleeping pills that had been prescribed by modern medicine, the anxiety pills that had been prescribed to me, right? I was already polypharmacy, even though I had nothing, physically in my blood work that they could connect to these problems I was having. And I said, every woman needs to know about this.
Yes.
And then I moved to primary care because I thought I had so much more that I could offer in the HRT space than I was currently offering to my patients in primary care. And I did the certification with World Link Medical in the US because we don't have certifications in Canada for this.
Nope.
And I continue to learn every day. That was 5 years ago that I switched to the HRT sphere. So a training with Dr. Neil Rouge, and then I had a mentor in Alberta, Dr. Robert Briggs at one of the spas I was working through. And it's just changed my whole trajectory.
Wonderful. I am so glad you heard the intuition to go into that bookstore and see the book. Because when you have those moments, to me, it's the goddess speaking through us, right? So you can't ignore her at your own peril, is what I like to say, right? It's an amazing thing because I find, first of all, nurse practitioner takes care of my own health, and she is my prescriber as well. And I adore her and her knowledge. It's the closest thing that I've seen to the functional medicine that I like to practice and that I learned so many years ago and continue to learn. And it's fascinating because my GP, when I see her, she's like, well, tell me what the nurse practitioner is doing. Oh, I'd love to have a nurse practitioner in the office. I got to have one of those. And it's like, okay, well, there's not enough nurse practitioners. Like now, of course, people are starting to become really aware that a nurse practitioner can take care of. Just yesterday, I was asked by somebody, can my nurse practitioner refer me to a neurologist? I'm like, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So, and she's like, I even have the name of the neurologist. I said, perfect. Take it to your nurse practitioner. So I have mad respect for what nurse practitioners do, first of all, but also how you contribute to the overall health system, which is, it's not that the socialized system is broken, it's that medicine is broken. Like it's that whole disease care versus preventative medicine. And there's just not that much of it. So in traditional or Western medicine. So I have a lot of sort of threads I want to pick up as you tell your story. But ultimately, I want to say I started my career in the United States too, and it was a nurse practitioner down there who actually taught me about midwifery and what nurse practitioners do. I had no idea. I'd never even heard that term. She was a Yale grad. So she taught me about a lot of things. And I was like, I don't even know if we have nurse practitioners in Canada. I've never even heard of them. Right. And at the time, I hadn't heard of naturopaths. There weren't that many people talking about that either. So I just find it interesting that us alternative practitioners, if you will, alternative to that traditional Western model, are being brought in, because I think we can pivot a lot easier. At least that's what I tell my own patients that say, why doesn't my doctor know about this? Well, medicine goes by research, and medicine goes by what's taught in med school. And my understanding is that it takes sometimes decades for the information to get from the research, the most contemporary science we have, to on the ground in the clinic, in the hospitals. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, as someone who's worked in the system. What's the holdup? Why is it that medicine is having such a hard time actually getting with the program on this prevention business?
It's interesting because my patients all ask that too, right? My clients that I take on, because they've typically been to their family doctor or even their nurse practitioner 4 or 5 times before they reach my virtual office, talking about their symptoms, asking for blood work, asking for treatment. And they're told, well, they're told a variety of things. I have a whole slide of things. We could chat about in terms of gaslighting patients and that they experience and that they tell me. And sometimes I'm shocked. And now I'm just getting over that. I'm still getting over that shock value, but it never. I still get some stories that shock me, like
Mhm.
physicians firing patients because they've come to me for help, even though they've seen their provider 5 times asking for help.
Okay, that's just an ego move, and that makes me mad. When I
Yeah,
hear that,
absolutely.
that
Yeah, the
makes me
steam
mad
was
as hell.
rolling out of my
I
ears.
bet it
I
was.
was like, "What?" I'm like, "Why would they do that?" Like, this is like, I wanted to take it to the media. I wanted to, grab
Yeah, I
onto
bet you
this.
did.
Of course, the patient, she just didn't have the energy to sit. And I feel so much better being with you anyway. So, but this still happens in our world. And there's a lot of evidence, correctly so, 17 to 20 years, they say,
Yeah,
to get evidence into practice.
but that's bananas.
But we have a lot of evidence that we already seen, like, and nobody's picking up on it. So there's
Yeah.
been several studies that support this idea of HRT for women
Mhm.
past what we knew about the WHI and the HERS study that was grossly
Oh,
overrated and
yeah.
overestimated in terms of what they said. And I get lots of questions about that too: breast cancer, blood clots,
Mhm.
strokes, so I have to
Mhm.
explain it to them. But I went through in my certification with World Link papers upon papers upon papers that have been just sort of buried in the medical literature about the benefits of HRT for women in terms of symptom control, chronic disease. And you see that we're having several more, right? Like a lot of our
Mhm.
IG experts,
Tons more.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
they're like bringing it out all the time. They're
Yep,
showcasing the evidence. So
yep.
it's not like, medicine has to go into somewhere deep to figure this out. Like it takes very little time to understand that it might be a
Yep.
good thing for your patient and that you should support it. As a
Yes.
physician or a primary care practitioner or nurse practitioner, you really should support this because it is of benefit to the female patient. But there's one study, and I actually went to look for it this morning,
Yes,
is that
please. Bring on the
so
science.
this is menopause managed knowledge in postgraduate family medicine, internal medicine, and OBGYN residents. It's a cross-sectional survey of they sent out 703 surveys. What's interesting that in this study that those docs reported the following: only 6.8% felt prepared to manage menopause symptoms,
Yeah.
and 20% did not receive any teaching on menopause during their residency.
And from what I hear from the OBGYNs, they get maybe 6 hours of menopause care. We
Yeah,
spend 40% of our lives in post-menopause era.
right,
40% of our lives. And we all have stories about mothers, aunties, grandmothers, great grandmothers going down to Alzheimer's, going down to heart disease, going down to osteoporosis. We can prevent all of this now, right? Now, some people, of course, you can't. There's the genetics and all of that. But for the vast majority of us, we can improve those risk factors greatly. This is, it's massive. It should be discussed far better. Okay, what was that number again? 6% felt prepared to
so
talk.
only 6.8% felt prepared to manage menopause symptoms, and 20% didn't receive any. So zero. It was totally ignored during the residency.
So this is the reason why when my community is listening, to my beautiful listeners, and Tammy, to your patients and mine, this is why you have to go to your GP over and over and over again, because they don't have the skill. They were not taught it. It was not part of their education. And then part of the problem is that these doctors are just too busy and they've got too many pressures to just keep pushing patient care after patient care after patient in order to pay the bills, because this is the reality of the fee for service model that we have here in Canada, which is a problem. By the way, a friend of mine who's a family physician said, "Do you think it's an accident that for fuck's sakes and fee for service are the same abbreviation?" I'm like,
I
not at
love that.
all.
I love that. I love that.
The
Right?
same thing.
Yeah. And well, let me tell you something about that, since we're on the fee for service model, right? Because it's a terrible model, right? It's an illness model. But here's the deal. And I explain this to my patients. Well, when do you go to your doctor? You go to your doctor when you feel sick, right? So if I don't treat your menopause, what are the chances that you're going to come back to me feeling sick several times?
Yeah.
Very high, right?
Yeah.
If I treat your menopause, what are the chances you're going to come back to me feeling sick? Maybe you'll come once a year for your annual appointment, but I won't see you again. So these patients that aren't being treated, these women, these menopausal women, keep going back time after time after time, and ching 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 ching, but no
Tammy.
response or no answer. I know, isn't that terrible of me?
Oh,
But
it's
I'm gonna
icky.
say it. It's
Yes,
icky.
you
That is
did.
icky. That is icky. But I'm gonna say it. It's icky, but it's the truth, right?
Yesterday I met with a financial planner, and he started off talking about the fact that we need to have a plan here. And he said the problem is that most of us will go to the bank for information on how to get ahead financially, so that here's your investments, but then they sell you their version that gives them the best money back, right? And it's the problem with the accountant is selling the things, and their investment banker is selling things that's beneficial to them. And it's like, whoa, what you're saying is huge. It's just massive. And I love you for blowing the lid off that. Didn't we start this by me saying I don't do controversial stuff? No.
Oh yes, I know. I'm sorry, but I
No.
can't help myself sometimes.
But listen, we must have this.
Right?
This is not political at all. Well,
Yeah.
maybe it is, but you and I, we speak about controversial things on the show all the time.
Yeah.
You did perfect there. And I'm so glad you're talking about it. That we need to discuss it because the system needs to change. And what I love is that Generation X, we're the ones that are saying, we are not accepting substandard care, gaslighting, being sidestepped, being dismissed, being ignored, whatever else it is, right? We are the ones that are changing it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Don't you love being a part of that?
I've been a part of it now for a while, right? Like
Yeah,
MP-led clinics in Ontario. Whew,
I
that was
bet.
a major eye opener for me.
I
And I
bet.
talk to my patients about it. I talk to my students about it all the time, in that this is how bad it got in Ontario. And this is controversial. I don't mean to deter it from our hormone
Please do it.
conversation,
Do
but
it.
when the MP-led clinics were announced in Ontario, it was the first decision that the Ontario health minister made without input from physicians. They basically made the decisions on their own. And when the announcement came out, the OMA, the Ontario Medical Association, took out ads in the newspaper that read as follows: if the pilot were unavailable, would you allow the stewardess to fly the plane?
Oh, God. That's
I know.
shocking.
Isn't that shocking?
Oh, how rude. Oh, you
Yeah.
had to have been pissed about that.
Oh, I was. But you know what? Everybody was saying, we as nurse practitioners as a group were invited by our, professional bodies to say strategically silent. And
Oh,
we weren't, I'm going to say we weren't supportive, but we were told, hey, just stay silent. We don't want to take this fight to the public. We don't want to, kind of go to their level. And sure
yes.
enough, Andre Picard, who is a, prolific writer in Canada about health
Yeah.
systems, came out and said, this is guerrilla warfare. Why would physicians ever say that about, their their highly educated colleagues.
Okay, so this is the ego conversation again, because I've said this over and over again. It's nurses that run the system in
Oh,
Canada, 100%, right? 100%. And we sort of, I don't know, to think it's a pilot stewardess thing. Oh, first of all, like, is this what's that old the TV show that's like the old Office, the Max something? No, Mad something. I don't know. It's the
uh,
again, here's my perimenopause brain showing up for this conversation or not showing up.
oh, I'm not
Um,
sure.
where it's like it's like the old office model where it's like in the 60s or something. It's a bunch of men running around, but it's actually the women that are running the show. And there's all this sexism and all of this stuff. Oh my God, that's terrible that I don't know that. But that's what it feels like. It feels like, first of all, ego, number one. And
Mhm,
number two, that there's not an actual acknowledgement of who's doing the heavy lifting in the system. The heavy
mhm.
lifting 100% is being done by the nurses. And as near as I can tell, it's been that way always. It's not being talked about, right?
Yeah,
Now,
it's invisible because we don't bill fee for service, so they don't count our widgets.
oh, isn't that interesting?
Mhm.
Wow. Wow. Okay, there's so many things for us to discuss here.
Yes.
And I want to pick up on something that, and again, we're talking about things that are a little bit controversial. Here we are. We're talking
Mhm.
about good polite Canadians who work in women's healthcare. And how can you not be mad as hell and say fuck at least hourly when you're working in women's healthcare in the current environment? We're just so underserved, right? So underserved. Okay. So I was recently talking with a friend about how this idea that when women get too powerful, I'm coming back to what you said about the WHI
Mhm.
and sort of women's health in general, I suppose, that when women get too powerful in the society, one of the things that is done is the aesthetic of being super skinny comes back. Because when
Oh.
women are underfed, when we're exhausted, we're not powerful like we are. Okay. So I'm just going to put that aside. So that's sort of the intro to this
Mm.
discussion. Now, I was having this conversation with my friend, the family physician, and she said, "What if the WHI was the same thing?" And I went, "Right?
No
I wish
way.
you could see everybody's listening to the show. I wish you could see Tammy's face right now. It's so good."
That is that's mind-blowing.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
I have goosebumps actually. Yeah. Okay.
Who
So,
knows? Who knows? Because there is so much propaganda in society that we just don't pay attention to. And when something comes out, in science, we tend to believe it.
mhm.
But if you look at new evidence, I forget what the percentage is, but there's a significant percentage where studies that are coming out are flawed or data is misinterpreted.
Mm.
So interesting, right? But that just blew my mind.
Yeah. Okay, so for those who are listening that don't understand what I just said or don't, I know I threw a bunch of abbreviations in there. So if women get too well fed and too rested and too well, that could be problematic for some industries, some governments, some communities. And what I said was that when women get too powerful, we reintroduce the sort of grunge look, the sort of super skinny supermodel thing, and then women starve themselves, right? And when we are underfueled, I think undernourished is what Peter Attia would call it.
Uh-huh.
When we're undernourished, we don't have the capacity to fight. So in the United States, the way I see this showing up is that the people that really need to get out to vote are the ones that have 3 or 4 jobs, that don't have health care, that don't have that have to struggle to put nourishing food on the table, and that don't get any sort of excuse from work or pay so that they can go vote. And that's one of the ways that people are controlled, right? So what I'm saying is that, is it possible that something like the Women's Health Initiative, which was the study that was stopped early because it showed that potentially HRT was causing heart attacks, strokes, breast cancer, and which we now know was a flawed study in a lot of ways. And even the way they reported it was over-reported and hystericalized and all of that. And is that another way that women are controlled, especially when we get powerful, when we get nourished, when we get slept properly slept, when we feel good, when we're not suffering from heart attack or Alzheimer's, then all of a sudden we are the elders and we've got all of this power. Can you imagine? I personally look forward to that world because I know very well that when women are healthy and have money, everybody does better, except for the people that
Yeah.
benefit from the system as it is.
Wow. Like, I'm still speechless. Like, I just I don't know what to say. Like, that just totally makes sense to me. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, there are some things that, we hear, and there's some discussions we have, but this is one of those things that is just sort of, whew,
Yeah.
wow. And it makes sense. It
Yes.
makes so much sense to me because, you talk about evidence. Well, we know the Menopause and Work in Canada report, right? Have you
Mhm,
seen that?
mhm. I
That was
have,
put
but
out by
please
the
remind
Menopause
us.
Foundation? Let
Yes.
me remind you, because
Yes,
I did
ma'am.
I did keep that out today, right? That groundbreaking data produced this report reveals the staggering impact of unmanaged symptoms of menopause on employers and the women's earning potential.
Ding,
So
ding,
when
ding.
menopause symptoms aren't managed, women's earning potential is low. Breaking the silence and stigma of menopause at work isn't just the right thing to do, it also benefits the bottom line. And this was actually a study of women, the Canadian women working force, right? It is estimated that the unmanaged symptoms of menopause cost the economy 3.5 billion per year. There's 237 million lost productivity, 540,000 lost days of work attributed to menopause symptom management, and 3.3 billion in lost income for women due to reduction and or pay or leaving the workforce altogether. And
Yeah,
this is when women should be taking those glass ceiling positions, right? CEOs,
absolutely.
VPs, but
Yeah.
they decline them because they feel physically, emotionally, and mentally unable to take.
Mitochondrial health is a critical piece of longevity and aging well. But where do we learn how to take care of our mitochondria? The powerhouse of the cell, providing us energy and strength. Mitochondria are in every cell in our body, our brain, and our muscles. Menopause is a time of reduced energy, causing fatigue, muscle loss, brain fog, changes to skin appearance and body composition, reduction in strength and endurance. These changes aren't just annoyances, they can seriously impact overall health and longevity. I get help with this using MitoPure from Timeline Nutrition. It's a clinically tested urolithin A supplement that rejuvenates the mitochondria. These innovative products use this natural compound to trigger an anti aging pathway in our cells called mitophagy. The research behind MitoPure is robust and impressive. I feel stronger and more energetic since taking the MitoPure soft gels. I've seen the science, and I rest well knowing how MitoPure is working to rejuvenate my mitochondria. The serum leaves my skin smooth and hydrated, and I've seen the fine lines around my eyes and forehead get softer with my very first use. It's a moisturizing powerhouse with longevity benefits. Yes, please. Timeline is offering our community 10% off your first order of MitoPure. Visit timeline.com/lovely to learn more. That's timeline.com/lovely. TIMELINE.com/LOVELY. Okay, so let's go next level. First, I want to say is thanks for reading that. That's statistics for Canada. The
Yes.
US has, I think we've got more people in all of Canada than they have in California,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah,
So much
absolutely.
Much bigger population. Imagine what those numbers are for the US. And for my US listeners, look it up, look to see if that research is not being blocked, right? Ooh, this is so fun. We're getting all the conspiracy stuff out today. Woo! Tammy, you make me laugh.
I kind of mentioned that before we come on the call, but
Yeah,
I'm used to
it's
rough
true.
waters.
No, it's good. It's so good because we need to be talking about it because it cannot be secret anymore
That's
if
right.
we're speaking about it, right? Okay. So women are okay, how did you say it? You said these are the glass ceiling years. I know, I love this part about my life. I'm the senior clinician, right? I'm the one that people want to come and ask about, right? Because I'm doing it for so long and I have a skill set that only comes really with time and experience, right? So you just said that women are turning down those positions. So what I want you to tell us, please, is why are they turning them down and what's the remedy?
Well, they feel even though they're prepared for them, we know that perimenopause and menopause leads to several symptoms of ill health, right? We
Yeah.
know this.
Mhm.
Fatigue, we can't sleep, anxiety, decreased sex drive. Well, even our vagina dries up, for goodness sakes. Like everything about us changes. And
Mhm.
a lot of those changes affect a woman's self-confidence, right? And she just feels unprepared and unwilling to take on those positions because she doesn't think she's able to do it in her current state. And the other thing is that okay, we're in the middle. Our parents are aging, our children are growing. We're in
Mhm.
that generation where we're taking care of our parents and taking care of our children, and we're feeling yucky ourselves,
Oh my God. I
right? We're
think that's an
feeling icky,
understatement.
right? We're feeling terrible,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's like, oh, you want me to be the VP? No, I don't
Uh-huh.
think I can do that right now.
Yes.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's where we lose out. So, what's the remedy to that? Every woman should have access to a knowledgeable provider who can provide education about their perimenopause, menopause symptoms, and just give them a safe space to talk about it. One, hear them. Two, because a lot of my clients say, oh, I feel like I've been heard for the first time, right? Like I feel like someone's listening to me. They need someone to listen to them. And if you don't have the skill set to do it, at least refer them or
Yes.
identify with them someone who can, right?
Yes.
I'm not asking family medicine or nurse practitioners and primary care to do this all, but validate your clients or the patient's story when they're in the
Mhm.
office with you, and tell them that yes, this is a real thing. Here are some experts that you could reach out to that might be able to help you. But instead they're told, oh yeah, we don't measure hormones. Yeah, no, I did your blood work, everything's fine. Or I love this one. Patient goes and has a hysterectomy, full hysterectomy, ask the doc, ask the surgeon, will I go into menopause after this? And the surgeon's, oh no, no, you're just going to skip
Yep.
that. You won't feel
Yep.
those. I'm like,
What?
what?
Where were you on that day of endocrinology 101?
Right?
Yep.
And or the other one, because weight is a big thing, right? Like we deal
Mhm.
with weight as we
Mhm.
age,
Mhm.
and we put on more and more weight and we can't take it off, and docs won't order thyroid for some reason. They think it's going to kill us or give us Graves disease, but it doesn't. Trust me, I have lots of clients on thyroid. And I had one patient who was struggling with weight. She went to the gynecologist, waited months because we make
Yep.
months to see a
Yep. Same
gynecologist, maybe
here.
even years, right?
Yep. Yep.
And the gynecologist said to her, well, you need to start eating less and exercising more.
Okay, is it 1992?
Right? When
It
she
didn't
told
work
me
for us
that,
then
I
either.
almost dropped on the floor. I'm like, and you know what else she said? What else he said? He said it's a myth that menopause causes weight gain. It's a myth. He told her it was a myth. Like, who does that to their patient?
Terrible. I had a patient, this is one of my favorite stories to tell, and the listeners will have heard it a few times, but I had a patient tell me recently, she's postmenopausal, but she was having a lot of joint pain, a lot of the musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was talking to her about it. I said, do you have trust with your doctor? Like, do you think you could ask for hormones or ask to have your hormones looked at? And she said, I asked my doctor like 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when I was going through menopause, if I could have the hormones. And he said to her, she's telling me this in the story, and I'm like, you can have picked my jaw up off the floor. He said to her, he said, "You don't want those. Those are bitch pills."
Like, right?
I know. I know. Listen, the dudes and the doctors better be paying attention. The ones that have gaslit their patients better be
Oh,
paying attention, because women in our age group, we're getting smarter, we're getting stronger, and we're not putting up with this shit anymore. We're just not doing it. My goodness. I think I've dropped more swear words in this episode than I
my
it's relevant.
and they're getting angry.
Tell me more.
Uh, uh,
Where are you
you
seeing
know,
it?
my some of my clients,
Yes.
because when they come to me, I provide a lot of education, starting right from the first contact, right? When they ask questions, I give them, validate their symptoms. I give them information about this, and then some of them say, "Well, I'm mad. Like, why didn't anybody tell me this before? Like, how come I'm
Ah,
just finding out about this from you?" Right?
yes.
Like, in terms of, like, I have patients who have severe osteoporosis,
Mhm.
struggling with 3 or 4 vertebral fractures,
Yeah.
never once offered
Estrogen.
estrogen.
Yeah, which of course we need progesterone for that too. But
Hmm.
wow, I mean, it's bananas to me. I think if a woman is recommended, first of all, number one most performed surgery in the United States is cesarean section. Number two is hysterectomy.
Hmm.
And the belief is that when you leave the ovaries, a woman doesn't go through menopause. But first of all, you take the ovarian artery when you take or the uterine artery when you take the uterus. Guess what? Now the ovaries lose, I think it's 90% of their blood supply. Yeah, right.
I
And
didn't
so
know that.
yeah, so I when I interviewed Dr. Luann Brizendine about this, she said that when she went through her own hysterectomy, she had the doctor put an estrogen patch on her butt right before they rolled her out of the surgical suite. So she never went without it. And it's an interesting thing because I've seen this language come up a few times recently where the implorement to from the woman to her healthcare provider is, please don't let my estrogen receptors become unbound. Now, isn't that a fascinating concept? Okay. So
Wow.
the idea is that if we are go for a prolonged period of time, and no, I don't know if anybody actually knows what amount of time this is, but we have the estrogenic decline that happens. Of course, it goes all over the place during perimenopause. And then once we stop
Hmm.
cycling, it really takes a nosedive. And at some point there, for some women, the switch gets flipped for Alzheimer's disease, in particular around the genetics of Alzheimer's
Mm.
disease, and that is the estrogen decline. Now, Lisa Mosconi's most recent research, which was released this week, talks about the estrogen receptors in the brain. It's the first time an in vivo study was done, meaning
Hmm.
in live females, looking at live female brains. You have her study printed off next to you, I'm guessing.
I don't yet, but I
Okay.
saw it. I
You
saw that
saw.
it was advertised
Yeah.
because I have a keen interest in this brain effect as well, right? Because
Yes.
almost all my clients
Yes.
have some brain fog.
Yes, yes. And this is for my listeners. This is the book I'm writing right now, which is on the brain effects of perimenopause in particular and menopause. Right. Because I do practice something called functional neurology in the office along with functional medicine. And so brain health is something I've been trained in. It's something I'm very interested in. I have a clinical neuroscience degree. And so I get to apply the hormone bits to the brain. What's so interesting to me, Tammy, is that in my own perimenopause, I'm just at the point now where I'm skipping periods. So that's where I am in my perimenopause. I'm 50. I'll be 50 next month, 51 next month. And this last year, holy cow, the brain symptoms for me, crushing, crushing. I don't think I really paid good enough attention to this kinds of things. I mean, certainly we talk about brain fog in the office lots. I mean, who hasn't had it? But then when you experience it, and it's like every day, no matter what you do in terms of your sleep or your food or your exercise, it's like pushing. Like I get when you said, I wrote it down, when you said the CEO, we turn down these positions because we lose the confidence to continue doing the job we're doing. I get it. I get it in a whole new level in the last year. Right? So it's one of those things that I think we need to all be talking about this a lot more because, a woman is more likely to attempt suicide during this time than in any
Highest
other
rate.
time. Yeah, highest rate, exactly. So if we can get to those women and say, "Look, this is not personal. It's physiological, it's biochemical, sister." And then, of course, what happens is you and I can afford to go to a private
Mm.
practitioner.
Mhm.
This should be standardized care for every woman.
It should. I agree.
I think it will be. We got some time to get there.
Yeah, 17 to 20 years.
Damn it.
Sorry, I had to bring that
Ugh.
up there. I know, right? Like the evidence to get into practice, and Canada is usually about 20 years behind the US. And I know the US is struggling too. I've seen the comments online, and the studies coming out of the US. The US is struggling with this as well.
Yep.
UK is far ahead of us, of course,
Yes.
but
Somebody has to blaze the trail. I'm glad they're
yes.
doing it. And I know they're really doing it around menopause in the workplace, which I really, and I think they've actually authorized or standardized HRT for every woman after a certain age. Isn't that correct?
I think in some places, don't quote me on this, you can actually
Yep.
go to the pharmacy to access it.
Oh,
Yeah, they're
can you
removing
imagine?
several barriers. Yeah.
Ooh, let's do that here.
Right?
That would be phenomenal.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to hear your thoughts on because I hear this a lot. For me, I want to see the labs. I want to monitor the labs for the case of are we getting the appropriate and physiological amounts that we want? We want to make sure it's not too much estrogen. We want to make sure the progesterone is landing in the way that it should. We also want to look at all the other markers, cortisol, DHEA, FSH, sex hormone binding, all of those things, right? We want to look at all of them. Um, but a lot of times, what I hear is we don't test for hormones and we're not going to give you any hormones, even if you have all the symptoms, or that becomes another barrier for care for women or for prescription. So, can you talk about that a little bit? Where do you sit on the whole stand, I should say? Where do you stand on that whole thing?
Well, I do a thorough lab analysis for all my patients when we do their initial intake because I don't want to miss something metabolically, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I want to know that it's hormones that are, contributing to these symptoms, and I don't want to miss anything, right?
Mhm.
Because we found pituitary tumors on first lab assessment, right? With high prolactin levels and very
Mhm.
symptomatic. Send the patient for an MRI eventually, and they have a tumor. So I don't want to miss anything. That's one of the reasons I do such an extensive blood work in the beginning, and that's great. And we do it annually because we want to make sure that we're getting some prevention from chronic disease, like
Mhm.
our lipids, our blood sugar, all of that
Mhm.
stuff. And I think it's important in personalized medicine,
Mhm.
which is what I provide and what should be provided in the hormone space,
Mhm.
is that every woman is different. And one of the things that can happen, one of the things that I see quite regularly because I'm doing the follow up blood work, is that if I've got them on an estrogen capsule, whether it's compounded or a commercial product, maybe they're not absorbing it
Mhm.
because their gut health is so
Mhm.
bad. But if I'm
Mhm.
not monitoring their blood and I just continue to feed them the
Mhm.
estrogen and they're still having symptoms, I keep increasing the estrogen, still having symptoms, it's because they're not absorbing it.
Mhm.
And I won't
Mhm.
know unless I see the estradiol
And
level
then you have to try
in the
a
blood.
different method. And of
And
course,
then I
we've
try
got,
cream and then
yep.
they get better.
And then they're like, "Oh my god, what did you do? It was amazing."
Yeah. Right? Oh, you're
Yeah,
fantastic. Then I get the gold star. So, blood work, it's controversial, but I mean, a
it
lot of
shouldn't be.
it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. You know what? And if you're taking a personalized approach to your HRT and your clients, then you should be getting at least a baseline and then monitoring, 10 to 3 months, 10 weeks to 3 months after you start the therapy to make sure it's working.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I like that too. I recently had a patient come in actually for brain injury for concussion, and she's in our age group, and she was talking about how she's symptomatic, and I said, "What does your doctor say about it?" She says, "Oh, he says I don't need hormones." And I said, "Well, I'm pretty sure you've got some autoimmune stuff going on. It's pretty obvious to me." And she says, "Oh, yeah, he said he would look into that and get back to me." And I said, "How long ago was that?" She said, 2 years. So he's not looking into anything. So I write a letter to the doc. I check off a bunch of stuff. Let's look at the autoimmune stuff. Look at, oh, he was mad as hell. It's like I looked on Netcare to see what kind of ordering he did. There was absolutely no blood work on this patient, and she was in her 50s, symptomatic for 10 years. So is that just laziness? Is that just, a bad practitioner? Is that just the system failing? Is it, med school failing? I mean, where do you see things like that? I mean, you and I both could share stories all day long about
Yeah.
this because we've seen it all and it's absurd. So
Mhm.
like where's the failure here? Does it come back to that study you shared?
I think partly starts with the study, right? It starts there. But I think it really comes back to what we said before, EGO,
Yeah.
ego,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because when I talk to patients and I don't know something, I
Mhm.
tell them,
Mhm.
you know what? I'm not sure about that.
100%.
I
Yeah.
don't know about that, but you know what? I'll look into it for you. And I do look into it and I look at the studies and I come back when the next visit is like, and I say, you know what? I did some more education and sure enough, this is a common one is you know what you have thyroid antibodies and they're in the thousands and you're infertile. So I think I know why you're infertile is because your thyroid's not managed appropriately, right? But this is just a case I go to the literature, I look, I learn, and
Yeah.
then I come back and I'm honest with my patients.
Yes.
And patients and clients expect you to be honest with them.
Yes.
They don't expect and they don't deserve to be disregarded.
Absolutely. And this is such an interesting thing too, right? Because I'm the same way. I'm like, I don't know the answer, but let me go find it for you and I'll shoot you an email later, right?
Yeah.
Like no problem with that whatsoever. But to me, if I'm going to have an ego about something, now again, this is what I imagine, but the world is a different thing, a different place sometimes than inside my head. But if I'm gonna have an ego something about something, I'm gonna have an ego about it because I did it so well that I blew it out of the water.
Hmm.
Not because I was substandard in my care and failed to take care of my patient on the most basic level. And that normalization of failing to care for women, whatever part of her life she's at, which is it's most acutely during our era, if you will. Okay, there's just no excuse for it. There's absolutely no excuse for it anymore. And the more we talk about it, the more it becomes unacceptable. Whereas for a long time, it was absolutely acceptable. The first time I had a doctor gaslight me, I was probably 21. Okay. And then I had it several times during my 20s. And that happened to coincide with when I was watching Christiane Northrup on Oprah, and she was talking about things, she was talking about a woman's body. The only thing I'd ever been taught about a woman's body was shame,
Mm.
right? It wasn't
Hmm.
power, it was shame.
Hmm.
And so when I saw Dr. Northrup on the show, I learned things like, the uterus is a woman's creative center. She creates things from there, right? And I'm like, who talks like this? It's fascinating.
Right?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what led me as absolutely what led me to be interested in women's health for myself first, because I was a strong enough personality that I just refused to be gaslit by a gynecologist. I just refused. I knew she was wrong. I knew she was wrong. And now the research shows that what she told me was indeed wrong. But my body knew. My body knew at that time. Okay,
Hmm.
let's do a little in case you wanted to comment on that. But that's sort of how I found myself doing it. But I would like to ask you about what does healthy aging mean to you?
Mm. Good question. You may have discovered this from, just seeking information about me, but I part of my research portfolio is about healthy aging, and we developed a regional center for healthy aging in Edmonton, Alberta, with Sage Senior Center in downtown.
Mhm.
And we've developed tools, a healthy aging asset index, which we've talked about nationally and internationally. And then we use this not in terms of hormones, but we do use it in terms of frailty. right? Because we don't want to address frailty once we get to that diagnosis.
Mhm.
We want to address it earlier,
Mhm.
especially in community, so that men and women, all genders, can age at home in a way that equals health to them,
Mhm.
right? Because I think
Mhm.
healthy aging may mean something else
Mhm.
to others.
Mhm. Mhm.
We have our own vision and our own diagnosis of healthy aging. You do too, probably, Fiona, what
Mhm.
your
Mhm.
healthy aging looks like. So it's a very
Mhm.
subjective um, concept in terms of how we each define that. So I believe healthy aging is just being supported to make the choices that you want about your own health to get to the outcomes that you are anticipating, right? So
Mhm.
it's what you're expecting from healthy aging, but we as a society should support, fully support those choices, including, because we're talking about HRT,
Mhm.
including HRT. We should
Mhm.
fully support that as an avenue for women to make that choice to age in a healthy way or to get to healthy aging. So we stay at home. We don't get vertebral fractures. We're not in major depression, which, we know that antidepressants are tested in men, not women. And the
Mhm.
reason they're tested in men is because, well, women have too many hormonal variations. Well, isn't that important to
We're too
research?
unpredictable.
We're too
Yes,
unpredictable. Isn't that important?
we
Like,
could get pregnant and sully the data.
right? Oh my goodness, right? So we're not going to include women. We're only going to include men. So I think it's different for everyone. But I think what society has to do is support those choices that
Mm.
individual makes to move forward to healthy aging. I can say honestly, I will never go off my hormones
Yes.
because
Yep.
my quality of life is good. I've read the evidence
Yes.
and it's good. Like,
Yeah.
and it's just going to keep getting better. So
Yes.
having my PhD, of course, gives me some benefit to reading those studies. I know what's good and what's garbage. I don't care
Yeah.
what they're telling us. I can read between the lines, and it's good.
And I want to circle back to something you said earlier, where you talked about the research that's coming out. Some of it can be skewed. And I know one of the things I've always had my eye on is when I'm looking at research is who's buying the research, who's paying for it. And I think, as usual in our society, follow the money, right? So it's just an interesting conversation to have, look at it and say, could it be skewed in a way that's beneficial to the person that's paying for the research? Probably, right? And how do we identify those kinds of things? I know it's a big conversation to have. Okay, back to healthy aging. So I love, because we've talked about Peter Attia, and for those of you that are listening to the show today, he has a book on the New York Times bestseller list. It's been out for over a year, called Outlive. It is excellent.
Mm,
It really is very good. And if you want to do a podcast instead, his podcast is called The Drive. Very sciency, but man, he delivers the goods. Same with Andrew Huberman. I love his show as well, because he just gives us all the circadian rhythm things, right? That are so good for sleep. Okay, healthy aging. You mentioned frailty, which I know is the important metric we look at in the research for, increasing the risk of mortality, right? So death risk does go up. We want to look at that frailty index, I think, is how it's sort of best looked at. And you want to do it before it gets to be too late. And this time that we're in right now, the perimenopausal era, the early menopausal era, these are the times where we want to be addressing the issues. And the biggest killers of women are heart disease. That's the big one, right? Cancer. We've got that broken hip situation. That's the frailty thing you're talking about. And also Alzheimer's, I think, is 1 in 8 women. So it's going to be up there, but it's a huge number as well. And looking at your hormone picture and optimizing hormones is we can make such headway into reducing the risk of all the things I've just mentioned.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Like, and I have some clients that come to me without symptoms. They've educated
Interesting.
themselves, and some women, they very few, but some women, breeze through. And of course they always say, oh, I have no hot flashes, right? Or I have none of this. But
Yeah.
there's like, you start going through the symptoms and they're like, oh yeah, I do have that, right? So they didn't recognize that as a symptom, but they come to me out of the desire
Mhm.
to avoid chronic illness.
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
Diabetes, heart disease, high cholesterol. And again, the proof is in the pudding, Fiona, is that my
Mhm.
patients who have been on HRT for long periods of time aren't
Yep.
coming to me on
Yes.
diabetes medications. They aren't coming
Yes.
to me on cholesterol medications
Yes.
because their functional estrogen has been preserved,
I love it. I love it.
right?
So, like, what's the threshold? Throwing around numbers is tough. Now, keep in mind, if you're listening to the show, it's dependent on how your own lab measures it. So the numbers change depending on where you are. So here in Canada, what number are you looking at in terms of estrogen? And if you want to dodge this question altogether, I would totally understand.
Well, I think it's interesting because, like estradiol, if we're looking at estradiol, that's what we're looking at in the blood. I think
Mhm.
it's interesting that a lot of women say, well, how much estrogen do I have? And I'm like, you don't have any, right? They don't have any when they're menopausal, right? And
Mhm.
that comes to a shock for some of them. They're like, I'm like, yeah, it's undetectable. It's less than 43.6 or less than 32. That's how they
Yeah.
report it on the labs,
Yeah.
right? And some will say a therapeutic level is between 200 and 800. I always seek to get their estradiol above 100.
Mhm.
Some women feel better when it's 200. Some women feel better when it's 350. So, again, you have to look at the picture for the
Yes.
individualized patient because it is personalized, precise medicine for that individual.
Oh, it's so interesting. And I think, we talked about barriers of care a lot in this conversation, but I think that ends up being one of the reasons why frontline medicine is struggling with this is because each woman is different.
Yeah.
And her hormonal picture is different. And the only way to really know is not just the symptom survey, but is to look at what the bloods are doing, what the blood is telling us is going on. Is this more of a stress problem? Is it more of a cardiometabolic problem? Is it more of an endocrine problem? By the way, this was one of the things my own nurse practitioner taught me that literally blew my mind after almost 20 years in practice. She said, the endocrinologists don't do hormones. And I was like, what? She goes, no, no, they don't do hormones. We don't refer for hormones to endocrinologists. But I'm like, but she goes, basically, we refer to endocrinology if someone has a thyroid disorder, if someone has diabetes, or some weird tumor that's involving one of the endocrine organs. I'm like, but but I don't get it. I mean, isn't that what endocrinology is the hormones?
I'm just going to blow your mind a little bit more,
Yes,
Fiona.
please.
So, the first number on your list there was thyroid.
Yeah.
The only thing they offer for thyroid, hypothyroidism, is Synthroid,
Yes.
which is only T4. They
Yes.
won't even think about desiccated thyroid in this country,
Yeah.
which is T4 and T3. And I
Yeah.
have several clients who have waited months, even years, to see an endocrinologist for thyroid, only to be told, oh, you're on the right dose because their TSH is
Is
within
fine.
normal range.
And that's the only thing that's being tested. Nobody's looking at anti-TPO. Nobody's looking at these other things. I know it. It's bananas. Our
Yeah.
thyroid is like the most ridiculous. It's not. It's such a female thing. Yes, we see guys with it, but there's not as frequently for sure. I mean, I don't know. What would your guess be in terms of how many women have some sort of thyroid? Usually hypothyroidism. I'm going to guess 1 in 6 in my office.
I think it might be more than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Undiagnosed, untreated, right?
Sure.
Suboptimal
Sure. Sure.
hypothyroidism or subclinical hypothyroidism. But I can tell you from looking at labs from both men and women,
Yeah.
the thyroid hormone in men is much, much better than the thyroid hormone in women. So I don't know why we're
Interesting.
not treating to the thyroid hormone in men because they're the ones, with stable weight and energy and things like that, right? And if something's good, why wouldn't you want a lot of it?
Heck yeah. So it's an optimization thing
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
Oh, so interesting. Now, I know when I was my first 2 years of practice were in the US. And so I learned about desiccated thyroid down there when I learned my functional medicine systems, et cetera. And then I came back to Canada. I remember talking to a pharmacist. He's like, yeah, we have something called thyroid by IRFA we can use. I don't even know if it's still around. And then there was some discussion about it having gluten in it. And it's like, oh my God, people who have thyroid disorder can't have gluten. Like, hello.
Yeah. It's just going to increase their antibodies, especially if it's Hashimoto's. Like,
Exactly, which is, I think, by far the most missed thing I see on
oh,
labs is Hashimoto's, and that's the thyroid antibodies we're talking about, guys. So I know it's here we are, two educated women trying to change the entire system with one conversation, which is always the frustration, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Tammy, I've learned so much from you today, and I thank you for sharing so generously. And I know people will, hearing this conversation, will want to know more about you. So, where can they find out more about you and your work, please?
Happyhormonescanada.ca is our website. And of course, they can follow me on Tammy Talks Hormones on Instagram. And I'm happy to say, Fiona, much like you, I am writing a book, Tammy Talks Hormones, that is all things hormones, perimenopause, menopause, medical gaslighting, you name it, talking about sex and vagina and libido and all those
Perfect.
topics that, you know, we can't readily search the internet for, because I even had difficulties when I was trying to search with
Mhm.
my perimenopause, and I found that moody bitches. So I'm trying to make Tammy Talks Hormone that, you know, moody bitches that
Yeah.
everyone's going to want to read.
Mhm.
And yeah, reach out because we're taking new patients. We're seeing patients in 4 provinces now:
Mhm.
Ontario, Alberta, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland. And I'm the provider. You'll see me.
I love it. I love it. Will you come back on the show when your book is ready to be released?
Absolutely.
I would love that.
Thank you so much.
You're
That's a
welcome.
fantastic opportunity, and I'm so happy to have this conversation today. I can't imagine what you and I could do with a bottle of wine in between us,
Oh,
right? Like
yes,
a bottle of
ma'am.
Italian. Like that would be
Yes. Yes,
we
I've
could
had that thought.
we could figure out so many things.
We could indeed. All right, last couple of questions I want to ask you. I have recently added a second question to the final question I'm asking all my guests. So let's have a little bit of fun with this, Tammy. So, actually, this new add-on question I think speaks to a lot of what we've talked about here. I want to normalize a world where women have the option to take a paid menopause leave just like we are offered a maternity leave. And it can be government regulated. If so, that's how it would be in the socialized country that we live in of Canada. But when I think about that, I think, okay, we want the pay that we've been used to getting. Okay, let's get that regulated. Let's make sure we have all the benefits we need for that and the government supporting it. And oh, by the way, in France, all women are covered for pelvic floor
Yeah.
physiotherapy for their entire lives. Okay. And just in case we think this is like blue sky thinking, which it is a little bit, but not so much. And we have there's a country in Africa that gives women paid time off while they're menstruating.
Hmm.
And in the Netherlands, when you've just had a baby, the government provides you with a night nurse for, I think it's 3 weeks, so that
Wow.
you as a woman can recover from the labor and delivery process. Okay, so it's not so out there. We're putting it in the field by having this conversation. So let's say Canada gives us a menopause leave for a year. And I want you to think about when you were in the deep of the muck. What would you have wanted to do? Who would you have wanted to see? What would have been on your list of things to help or people to help during that time?
Well, first, let me start by saying, what a civilized idea, right?
Civilized, I love it. Yeah.
It is like all those things you mentioned. Those are civilized ideas. Those are fair things that women should expect, not have to demand, right?
Mhm.
Who would I want? Well, I really like the idea of a menopause leave. I think so many women could benefit from that experience, because it is a transformational journey. It is, right? And women need time to think about this and make choices that
Mhm.
are going to affect the last chapter of their life. So having the stress of work, relieved from that, that would be optimal. I think a counselor is always a great idea, especially if you
Mhm.
can find the right one, the right counselor, to
Mhm.
talk about strategies, to support this transition. I think access to a provider, an HRT provider, because we're not getting it in the public sector, that cost should be covered. Any medications that are required that will help with the symptoms should
Mhm.
be 100% covered. And what else would I want to see? Who else would I want to see? Pelvic floor physio, not so much, but I do refer a lot of patients for that.
Mhm, mhm,
Just because my estrogen and testosterone do a great job of, helping me not to pee my pants when I sneeze.
mhm.
But I think, a counselor would be a great idea. I'm not too sure what else. Just having that time,
Yeah.
to reflect on your life and not being so stressed for self-care. Even like a yoga membership,
Mhm. Yep.
maybe, a
Mhm,
fitness
mhm,
membership,
mhm,
maybe a certain certificate to a supplement store, so
mhm.
that we're ensured that we're getting all the right supplements like
Yep.
vitamin D, vitamin B, magnesium. They're my
Mhm,
top three for 2024.
mhm.
So I think some of those things would really support women through that journey.
Oh, some great ideas there. Excellent, excellent ideas. All right, so we're putting that out there in the field to let. Can you imagine menopause leave? I mean, every
Wow.
woman goes through menopause if she lives long enough, but not every woman has a baby. So, and I don't know
That's right.
about you, but my energy when I was in my baby making years versus my energy now,
Whew.
this is the one I need to recover from. And you said something interesting too about the transition. And I've come to recognize for myself, certainly for my patients, is that the spiritual transition of menopause, going from taking care of others and things outside of ourselves to taking care of ourselves, is a massive transition that we are absolutely few of us are prepared well for.
Hmm.
So,
Yep. And it
my
almost seems selfish to women sometimes. Women feel almost like
oh,
I'm taking care
100%.
of myself and I feel selfish,
Absolutely.
right?
Yes, yes. Although I will say, I find it interesting. They say that until their estrogen drops. And then all of a sudden, those people pleasing stuff, that biological impetus to give a shit about other people is gone.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
You know
Right?
what I'm
Yeah.
talking
Oh
about.
yeah, I know. I've had, but then the guilt creeps in.
Yes. Yes, of course, there's always something because we were taught when we were young all of the
Yeah.
ways to self-flagellate. If we're not starving ourselves, then we're saying all these things about, oh my God, there's so much more for you and I to talk about. Okay, here's the final question. Final question. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell your younger self?
I would tell my younger self, ask for some progesterone. You know what? I've thought
Mhm.
about that because I've seen those, I've seen this stuff online about what would you tell your younger self? I would tell myself, hey, look into some progesterone for all those symptoms you're having, because I had unbalanced estrogen my whole life. And it
Yes.
was trying to get out somewhere, my fibroids, my endometrioma, my
Mhm.
endometriosis. And I
Mhm.
suffered needlessly for years,
Yes.
needlessly. And I did suffer.
Yeah, I have no doubt you did.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
so
and
many.
maybe for a little bit of Vyvanse, because I think I had some impulse control issues that
Again,
resurfaced
who
during
who
menopause.
doesn't? Yes. You know, we have a whole episode on ADHD, how it comes up, or other things show up, whether it's, and what's interesting is I think giving estrogen first before trying the seems to work well for some women. So it's an estrogen problem, it's
It
a
is.
fuel problem
Yeah.
as much as it could potentially be a brain organization. Anyways, you and I could go on. Girlfriend, thank you so much for the time. It's probably a good thing you and I don't live in the same city. We wouldn't get anything done today. We'd be like, I'll meet you for lunch.
Yeah, and it would be the whole afternoon. It would go
It
into
would.
happy hour.
Yeah. We'd have to call the husbands to come pick us up.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
I love East Coasters. Thank you, Tammy O'Rourke. I so appreciate the time today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lovely. I look forward to coming back on when my book is released.
I can't wait to have you. Thank you again.
Thanks so much. Bye bye.
The information and other content provided in this show, or in any linked materials, is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice, nor is the information a substitute for professional medical expertise or treatment. We are doctors, but we aren't your doctor. Seek your doctor's opinion. If you or any other person has a medical concern, you should consult with your healthcare provider or seek other professional medical treatment. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something that you have heard in this podcast or in any linked materials. If you think you may have a medical emergency, Call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The opinions and views expressed on this page and in this show have no relation to those of any academic, hospital, health practice, or other institution. Thank you.